All right. Welcome, everyone. This is our third part in the series of talent and team building, and we're here to talk about how to support talent. And we have a fabulous panel with us today. This is the panel, so we will be hearing from them shortly. I'm going to be your host today, Ian Gardner. I'm also a co-founder at Innovation Bay and an investor as well. So I'm a partner at Gelix Ventures. So yeah, really looking forward to chatting to these guys. Before we start, I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting. Well, I think all of us are probably meeting in the land. I'm in Bondi Junction, which is part of the Gadigal land. So I do want to pay our respect to their Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, their elders, past, present, and emerging, and yeah, extend any welcome to those people joining us today. A little bit about Innovation Bay. Hopefully you all know who we are and what we do. We've been connecting the community across Australia and New Zealand really since 2003, so quite a long time. And yeah, our job, our function, or our mission is to try and connect founders, investors, and anyone else that's interested in the ecosystem, and we love doing it. We are bringing this event to you, I guess, in partnership with Summit. I mean, Summit's a group that we launched 2.5 years ago now. It's a peer collective for some of the best tech founders in the country. We kind of call it Series A and beyond. I mean, the bar to be a member is, approximately, are you worth $20 million as a business? Look, and the reality is, it's a tough journey. We all know how hard being a founder is. And this is designed to try and help founders help each other. The group is now sitting at 45 members. When they started, I think the average was about $30 million in enterprise value, and that's jumped now to about 90 million on average. So we certainly can't claim credit for that, but we like to think that we've had some impact in that. All about solving problems, dealing with challenges. It goes beyond work, so it's about the personal life and your relationships too, because if any of them are out of whack, then your work is going to suffer too. So it really is a great group. So thank you to Summit, and if you're interested, we can just get in touch and we'll tell you more about it. We are using Hopin. If you've joined us in the last few weeks or even last year when we were doing these, Hopin's designed to be a little bit like a real event. I know we're not in person yet, but we'll get back there. So you're going to see the main stage, which we're going to jump on, and the panelists will join us. Afterwards, please do hang around. There's a chance to have a follow-up conversation and actually get involved in the conversation yourself with either the panel in one of the breakout rooms, or you can click the one-on-one networking, which I tend to like because you just get to meet someone new, hopefully for a quick 5-minute chat, and it's just a really nice way to meet the others who are on the call. All right, look, let's start. This is the third in the series. We started a couple of weeks ago talking to some founders. So we had some great founders, all from the Summit Club, in fact, and that was a really fantastic conversation. Last week we chatted to some operators, which again was awesome. We really enjoyed that. And this week we're talking to investors and how investors are going to support their startup talent. So we should get started. I might ask the panel to click their magic blue button and come up on stage and join me just while I do an intro. Welcome, Dan. Welcome, Nick. I think Hannah's joining us too. Reminder to everyone, actually, there is a Q&A function. So if you want to ask a question, we'd love to hear from you. I've got plenty of questions, and anyone that knows me knows I can ask questions all day, but I would love to hear from you. There's a way you can vote them up or down, a little bit like Slido. So when you see the questions coming and you like it, please do click thumbs up. It just makes my job a lot easier. Let me introduce the panel. Hannah Field, you are a partner at Folklore, which before your life in tech, I mean, you've done a lot of stuff. And in fact, if you want the full background, Hannah and I did a podcast I think it was right before lockdown, if I remember, Hannah.
Before the first lockdown.
Yeah.
And everyone was trying to figure out what the hell COVID was. So,
yeah.
It seems like a lifetime ago.
It does seem like a lifetime ago, but I do remember it because I was fascinated by some of your background. You've been a freelance violinist. You've helped build a Grammy-winning contemporary classical music record label. I don't think there's many VCs that have done that. You've scaled teams. You've worked across sales, ops, and biz dev at various high growth companies, Dropbox, Pandora, and I think you're one of the first employees at Canva, if I'm right.
Pretty early team
very early team.
Canva,
But
so.
yeah, look, you certainly know that recruitment piece, and we're going to love to hear your thoughts on that. Dan, welcome. You're a partner at SquarePeg, and you've been there for ages, 9 years. I think you were the first non-founder hire at SquarePeg.
Making me feel old, Ian.
No, mate. I'm heading your way in the hair category, but you look a lot younger. You spent a few years in Melbourne, and then you relocated to Tel Aviv. So you were in Israel for about 6 years, building up SquarePeg's business over there. So very experienced, and it's great to have you back in the country, even though we still haven't caught up in person, because I think you came back in lockdown. If that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, good.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. No, it's, thank you. Nick, you're a general partner at Blackbird. I'm sure we've all heard of. You look after the Melbourne office. You've done a bunch of other things before. Previously, you were CEO at StartMate. You co-founded Sessions, and you've got technology that's helped people. Yeah, so Sessions was a technology that helped people build better lives, and it was acquired by MyFitnessPal back in 2013. So, very experienced founder and now investor. So. Look, this is a fantastic panel, and I'm really looking forward to the chat. Let's get into it. Look, Hannah, I might start with you, not because you're a recruiter, but I think you probably had most experience of this. I mean, being a recruiter is a tough gig, as I think we talked about in the podcast. I mean, what we want to hear from here is like how investors support their founders and portfolio companies when they're thinking about talent and recruitment. So. I mean, how do you think about it now that you've moved on from being in the kind of founder or early founder or early employee stage into the recruitment stage and now into the venture stage? So, what does Folklore do to support its portfolio?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Maybe to set some context. So, yes, I was a recruiter for a few years, and that was off the back of having a bunch of operational business roles at a number of different startups and doing a lot of functional hiring. And I don't think I had any more, was able to build any more sort of empathy and appreciation for how hard hiring is as a recruiter. It is a tough gig. And I think, there's like bad recruiters and then there's really great recruiters. So when you find the great recruiters, definitely partner with them. And just a ton of learning and insight doing that firsthand and seeing businesses like Dropbox scale from 100 to over 1,000 in 24 months, like really tremendous learnings in that experience, and being part of a founder-led hiring committee that enabled that kind of hyper growth. And I think the TLDR of that whole experience is the ability to hire and build a team is a make or break it exercise for founders. And if you cannot attract talent and you cannot retain talent, you can't build product, you can't deliver product, you can't go to market, you don't have a strategy, you don't have marketing and sales and customer support and all of these functions that are a flow-on effect for your ability to build a really strong talent pipeline. So, just even from a macro level, there are definitely sort of global platform VC communities that have done tons of polling and happy to share details later on that around like what's keeping founders up at night and what funds are doing internationally to support founders, and talent is usually the sort of top two items on that. And so from the Folklore perspective, what does that actually mean? We don't have an explicit recruitment function at the firm. And I know a few other firms do, and probably Nick will talk more about what Blackbird's doing. But for us, a lot of that is building really tight relationships within our networks and rich communities of talent. So that can be anything from specialist recruitment firms to, we've been longtime supporters of the StartMate Fellowship, Women's Fellowship Program, which is looking to build a talent pipeline of women in pretty generalist kind of big company roles and funneling them into startups. Partnerships with organizations like What the Health Community, Textbook Ventures, which is even going further upstream and, building that talent pipeline even from the university level. And, you know, on top of that, you know, we have someone on our team, Steph, who does a ton of PR support. So PR isn't just about, hey, we're launching a new product. PR is an amazing opportunity to build a brand and talk about, hey, this is what we're doing as a team, and build visibility in the Australian startup community as a destination for really talented people to join your company. So I think probably the only other thing to top that off is we do an internal program series called Bench Strength, where we focus on really critical issues founders are dealing with. So anything from bringing advisors on board to talk about what is the latest on the immigration landscape. You know, we all know that can change overnight. So how do you stay in tune to you know, supporting the attraction of talent overseas? How do we actually export talent to new offices overseas? You know, to things like, you know, how do you build a really vibrant and robust culture in a distributed team environment, or during cases like lockdown, which has really changed the way we work.
Sorry, Hannah, that was called Bench Strength, is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
And is the concept of that, you kind of get all your founders or all the portfolio founders in a room or a, you know, virtual session, and you talk to them about this specific issue? Yeah,
that's exactly right. I think our view is we don't want to dictate to founders what their issues are and just serve it up to them. We want to be guided by what are the key issues that are really concerning founders at the moment. And so we keep a close tab on what are the things that they're dealing with today. And, you know, currently we're going through lockdown, well, depending on what number you are and what city you're in, you know, this is a repeated issue, and there's, you know, huge amounts of uncertainty. And so let's actually you know, rearrange the agenda and do a topic that really focuses on that, but more holistically about building a future of distributed working and building cultures that sustain themselves above an in-person environment, because I think this is where we're going, right?
Okay, look, I mean, there's tons to unpack there, and we'll definitely jump into that a little later. Dan, I might jump to you. So, I mean, SquarePeg, you're a big fund now, and you've got sort of global, you know, aspirations because you're already doing it, but you are global, and you've got, you know, certainly over $1 billion. What's the official number you've got under management now?
Just a smidge over $1 billion, yeah.
So $1 billion, and it's not quite, you know, everyone talks about the 2 and 20 model with venture, so it's not quite as simple as 2% of $1 billion. But like, the reality is you have an operating budget that allows you to go and hire specialists in theory. So how are you thinking about this? Is SquarePeg got a talent function that is supporting the founders? What is SquarePeg doing in this area?
Yeah, I mean, it's an evolving piece for us. You know, I think supporting founders with hiring and with team more broadly is obviously fundamental. I mean, Hannah talked about team is everything. You can't, you know, if you can't scale your org with great talent, if you can't retain that talent, then you can't do anything else. So, you know, absolutely echo what Hannah said there. And because it's so fundamental, it's something we've thought about from day one. Before we had a fund, you know, when we started, we were a deal organization, and still talent was top of mind and how we help in that respect. I'd say there's sort of a few key areas that we think about. One is sort of team structure or org design. So really trying to help our founders think about, you know, not just what are their immediate hiring needs today, but what's the business going to look like 9, 12, 15, 18 months from now? Where are the key gaps? What do they need to do to plug those holes? How do they think about really scaling that part of their, you know, that part of their team? And obviously a lot of that is thinking generally around exec or senior hires, but not always. It's, you know, often around filling the rest of the team. Hannah talked about culture as well, and something that's super important. I mean, one of the nice things, I guess, about, you know, so we operate in 3 core geographies here in Australia, in Israel, and in Southeast Asia, and office in Singapore. Most of our, you know, there's a lot of differences between those geos. One of the things that's similar is almost all of our organizations have offices in multiple geographies. You know, Australia typically serving offshore markets, Israel almost always serving offshore markets, Southeast Asia pan-regional through the area. And so thinking about how, exactly as Hannah was talking about, different offices, how you manage culture, often it's different locations. And so how you pull all that together is something we spend a lot of time with our founders thinking about. Obviously, when it comes to hiring, you know, specifically being able to source candidates is something we're always trying to help with. We recently built an internal tool that helps helps build candidate pools for specific positions. It's something that we sort of ran as a bit of a trial, had some early success, and now doubling down. We're actually hiring someone full time to sort of work on product development for that piece, which will be really interesting.
All right, so you are listed. Sorry, is that in the talent function piece you're hiring?
No, so this is, it's more a data piece that we're using around building candidate pools, but on the talent function itself, that is an area now we are hiring for. We're hiring for a head of talent, and it sounds similar to what Hannah said. I think it's pretty it's pretty common that if you go and speak to a bunch of founders and ask them what's keeping them up at night, what are their issues, it's always going to be something around either I can't hire fast enough, or how am I thinking about scaling my org, or how am I thinking? It's something related to people, right? Yeah. And I think it's too easy often to just say, oh, it's recruitment, it's hiring. There's often a lot of things that sort of sit under that. And so, in speaking to a bunch of our founders, sort of highlighting some of their issues, and then going to speak to a bunch of other funds to see how they're approaching this in terms of, those internal roles, in terms of other founders outside our portfolio, where we've landed is a head of talent role that's really going to act more as I guess a consultant with our companies. So it's less about, hey, I need to hire this specific person. How do I hire this person? That will be a part of it, but it's more around the strategy and thinking about how do I scale my org? What's the infrastructure I need to put in place? What are the processes and foundations I need to put in place?
Yeah, cool.
And us being able to provide that expert to our portfolio, and that's a role we're actively hiring for now. So hopefully we'll close that in the next month or so.
All right. So if anyone's listening and they want to apply, where do they go? Here's your chance to plug it.
Are that someone? Absolutely. Please reach out. You can either ping me. That'd be great.
All right, Nick. Look, I mean, Blackbird again, $1 billion or thereabouts. Can't remember the exact size of your funds under management now. Where are you at?
It's not about the size, Ian.
Yeah, no, that's true.
It's about how it's deployed.
That was a correct answer. But look, anyway, you're a large fund, so the reality is that Blackbird's, I guess, been quite public about its internal approach to thinking about scaling itself and your internal functions. And even I mean, do you have so I guess a couple of questions here. Like, one, do you have a head of talent just to hire for yourself at Blackbird? And two, do you have a talent function that you are applying to help your portfolio companies?
So we don't have a head of talent internally just for ourselves. And we do have a head of talent in Nell Hardy, who joined us last year, and she is she's our head of talent. Yes, and serves our entire portfolio. So this all traces back to 2019 for us. So one thing that all of us on the call will get is that we're magnets as firms in the ecosystem that are well known and trusted. We're magnets for talent. So firms will say, so people that are looking for their next role will come to us and say, hey, I'm looking for my next role and I would love for it to be a Blackbird company. Can you think of anything? So we started to see that organic inbound come to us with just incredible people. And so as an experiment all through 2019, as I kind of took on this internal project to see how many people I could place in the portfolio or even outside of the portfolio at companies that we had good relationships with. So I had about 100 people just kind of come inbound, and then I was able to place 20 people, of which 10 had landed in the portfolio and 10 outside. So very senior people, Air Wallix, safety culture. So really high quality people. And so me as a partner doing that part-time and seeing the impact, we realized there's really something here for us. But we could choose to help founders in any number of ways. But the question is, do we have a competitive advantage? Like, would it be better for us just to give the money to the company and have the company go and create this role internally? And when it comes to talent, the competitive advantage we have is just that we now are a known entity in the market, and exceptional people looking for their next roles will come to us at the beginning of their process and say, if there's anyone in your portfolio hiring a chief revenue officer or a chief technology officer, I'm interested and I'm looking. And so we're able to provide that service to our portfolio, and we actually provide it one thing we're really clear on internally is if we can't land someone in the portfolio, it's better that we keep them in the ecosystem, even if they're not in our portfolio, because all of us are relying on this huge talent influx from traditional industries to startups to succeed. So we started it as a trial and saw value. We felt like we had a competitive advantage based on the inbound that we were seeing and that we could deliver that service to our founders. And then in 2020, Nikki, who's the co-founder of Blackbird, gave a presentation at our offsite, which has now gone down in legend of Blackbird. It was called the Product Mindset presentation. And it was all about the limitations of a single person delivering service and the ability of a product to scale way beyond what a single person can do. So if you see what Nell has done as she's come in, she's built out a product for talent where she could never deliver 20 or 30. She's only going to cap out at 10 or 20 meetings a week. But a product that our founders can access and that people wanting to get in touch with our founders can scale to hundreds of people, which is where it is today, and hopefully thousands as it grows. So we've really adopted not a service mindset, but a product mindset, and we think that's what will scale as our portfolio scales and as the volume of inbound talent looking for jobs in startups comes to us. Yeah,
that's interesting the way you're talking about it. I mean, because you have like some huge companies in your portfolio. So I mean, Canva, and in fact, Amy from Canva was on the show last week, and she was talking about the recruitment function there. I mean, you got Safety Culture; they've got their own head of people. So the reality is, like, you're kind of making the noise as Blackbird, and with that banner, the sort of halo brand almost that then cascades down. And it may be that the noise you're making is picked up by one of the heads of talents from the individual portfolio founder. So it's not that if you're a portfolio founder under Blackbird or SquarePeg or Folklore or whoever, that you can rely on their head of talent to find you all the staff you need. You're still going to have to employ your own.
Yeah, and we're just another source of high quality people who are signaling to us their skill set, what they're looking for, and so we're doing a lot of work there for those heads of talent and portfolio companies to just come in and say, I'm looking for this role, these 3 profiles are perfect, and then we can automate the connection between the candidate and the company. So it's magical when it works.
And I mean, how many roles are we talking about? I mean, maybe I'll ask Dan first, and on this one. Like, so I mean, Dan, like, if you think about the SquarePeg portfolio, and I'll ask all of you this, but if you think about your portfolio, like, how many roles are currently open?
Thousands. I mean, I think at last count just using Getro, we were checking it out yesterday. I think we were over 1,000, and obviously that's not pulling everyone in, and it is the constant, the constant need of any scaling organization. And, we're all fortunate, all of the 3 of us fortunate to have companies in the portfolio that are growing fast. And with that growth comes huge demand for talent. And it's the war for talent in all the geos where we're operating in is getting tougher. I really, I like the point Nick was talking about creating a vacuum and as an industry for getting the best talent in the country and into this industry. I think the industry has come a long way since we started 9 years ago. Back then the best and brightest were going to be consultants and doctors and lawyers and all the sort of traditional industries. And the amount of people we're hearing from now, exactly as Nick was talking about, hey, I want to get into tech, really bright, passionate people. Either they've been peripheral to the industry and they want to get in, or they've been outside it entirely and want to get in. That for me is one of the most exciting things about the growth of Australia. Is we are now pulling in amazing people, and as well, obviously, the recycling, the people coming from the big companies that are being built here, that are the alumni that are going out and being recycled. That's an amazing aspect of the growth of Australia. But but the amount of companies, the amount of people that our companies are looking for is extraordinary. It's just a constant need to grow.
Well, maybe I won't ask that question of all of you. I might just change it a little bit. I mean, the reality is, as VCs, our job is to accelerate growth. I mean, that's really why we exist. And what does a fast-growing tech company spend its money, its investment capital on? I mean, it's basically people. So Hannah, let me ask you this. I mean, what percentage of the money that you'll invest on average in a company will go on its people versus other things?
Yeah, I saw this question, I sort of struggled because I think it sort of depends on the stage of the investment, because many of our investments are pre-seed or seed, in which case actually 90%, 95% of that capital is going to be towards hiring your first couple of engineers, your first product person, and maybe that's it. And that's just to get a product out the door. And then what you'll see is over time, as that capital or as that business starts to grow, and hopefully it does and gets into Series A, then you get into larger rounds. And that allocation of capital to people and team building may not scale at the same proportionate level. It will obviously scale in raw dollars or in absolute dollars. But then naturally, you might want to build out an office to house all these people. You've got to keep the lights on, and you've got legals and administrative and back-end functions, and then you're trying to build an office in a new country. So I think it's hard to sort of pinpoint a percentage, but I would say in its early stages where we see, we're often sort of a first institutional check into companies, it's easily 90+%, if not more, at that very early stage. And then you'll see like fluctuations over time, but absolutely salaries are going to be undoubtedly one of the biggest line items for any business, regardless of stage.
All right, great. We've got some questions coming in, so I'll jump to them in a sec. But Nick, I might ask you, I mean, you've been a founder, as in fact most of the panel have, as well as an investor. Maybe some practical tips. Most of the audience here are founders. I mean, what are some of the common mistakes that you've seen founders make when it comes to recruitment and hiring and, this sort of team building stuff that you would try and encourage people to avoid?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll put it in the positive is versus what would I avoid, like what would I seek to replicate. I think the founders that are very thoughtful about the employer brand that they are trying to build from day one, really that investment pays huge dividends. So a couple of examples come to mind. Eucalyptus is a healthcare company that we've funded, and in their original pitch deck, one of the sort of core pillars of their business was that they believed they could find a talent advantage in their team by hiring from traditional industries, consulting, banking, and lawyering, and bring them into their team and unlock their entrepreneurial skills in a completely new way. And so from day one, they targeted that persona to come in and be the GMs and the builders of their brands. And what happens is you make 4 or 5 excellent hires, they then sort of become beacons in the ecosystem. So, I think of Nicole, who's the general manager of the Kin brand, which is one of the Eucalyptus's sub-brands. She went through the first cohort of the StartMate Fellowship. And I think she represented for a lot of, she came from consulting, and she represented for a lot of people like, wow, she was this sort of lighthouse person that people could identify with and say, she's sort of like me. She sort of has a background, and look at how she's unlocked at Eucalyptus. So I think being very purposeful about the way you hire and the kinds of people that you're hiring. The other example I'll use is a company called Dovetail. And they have been really, really clear that we are an in-person company. The joys and benefits of working at Dovetail will be about the time we spend together. We're going to invest in an amazing office. We're going to have an in-house office culture. We're going to have Friday demos every Friday that anyone can come and see what we're working on. And so they have just built, I think those two teams have scaled the quickest at the highest quality of any team that I've seen over the last 3 or 4 years. And I think in both cases, it was this real craftsmanship about the experience of people thinking about working at those companies and how you onboard them, the experience you give them, and then how you leverage their experience to find people like them.
Yeah. Hannah, I might throw that one to you as well. I think it's always good to get real life examples as to what's good and what's bad. So anything you want to call out?
I think, and this is not just limited to our portfolio, but just in my personal experiences and what I've seen. One really common mistake I see, and often it's outside of sort of product and engineering, more sort of sales and marketing roles, is you're assessing people in a very specific skill set, but you lack an understanding of how that skill set has been previously deployed. So what I mean by that is, you want to hire for sales, head of sales, and they might have incredible pedigree and great brand names, but that skill set they've developed in the context of those brand names are huge enterprise organizations. Yes, they look great on a CV, but they have no understanding of how to get into the weeds of a 5-person organization and actually build something from scratch. They haven't done that in 10 years. And they don't actually have the appetite to do it or the conviction to get their hands dirty. And I think it's so important to look below the surface of what looks good on the outside to really assess the substance and the drivers and motivators of someone who might be coming from a very different environment than the one that you're hiring for, and really tease that out. So, often, talking to founders, the first head of sales you hire, the first marketing person you hire, is more often than not going to necessarily be the right person. And I think it's a very, very common mistake. I'm sure Nick and Dan have seen this across their portfolios as well. It's really challenging. And I think, when I look at the pattern of decision making, it often is a gravitational pull towards brand or certain pedigree without really assessing the sort of substance of the person below the surface.
Yeah.
So that would be my kind of word of wisdom around that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add.
Sure. Yeah.
There's very few hard and fast rules. There's going to be some companies where hiring super fast is what leads to their success. There's going to be other companies that will tell you they actually took a really much more measured approach and waited for the right people, and that led to their success. Nick just talked about Dovetail, who have got quite a, they want to be quite focused on having people in office. And then, you look at the other side of the coin. I think what did Canva just announce? They talked about 9 days in the office for the year or something like that. And so it's which one's right. It's not about one rule being right. It's about finding what works well for your organization, for your people, for the culture you're building, for the type of company you're building. And so any hard and fast rules are ones to be wary of. I think I would encourage all founders to try and get a broad perspective of people they trust, of organizations that that they look up to and want to emulate, and bring the pieces that are going to work well for them. That said, I think the interesting thing is we're all sitting here talking about how important team is, how important, investing in your people is. The one thing that still sort of shocks me a little bit is how many startups get to a decent scale and they think they're investing in people in the sense of, investing in process for hiring people, but they haven't actually started to invest in, in the people function. So what does culture look like internally? How do we think about embedding our values? How do we think about, the process of feedback or reviews and promotions and these kind of things? And so I would say that's an area that's typically underinvested in, and people end up playing a lot of catch up to try and scale their, not so much the hiring side of things, but the more the people side of things. And so I would always encourage founders.
This is building to a big reveal of everyone should sign up for Culture Amp. I appreciate you doing that.
That's so good.
You go, Hannah.
I was going to say, I love that Dan's talked about value setting. Like, you'd be surprised at how many companies don't even think about values, and then they go on a hiring spree and they're like, oh shit, what are our values? And it's like, if you don't have a set of core values, what are your guiding principles around people? And how do you assess consistently? And how do you actually replicate that ability to hire and pass that know-how and that understanding, that sort of intrinsic belief in sort of where we're all going and what are we building for, and what kind of culture do we want to operate into sort of future functional leaders of your firm, so that they are empowered to hire and make the right people decisions. Yeah. So
no, I think
that's a great call out, Dan.
Just as a tactical piece of advice, what I have started doing on that is for every founder that we invest in at the early stage, I have a template of how I like monthly updates work. And the top of the template is our values and how we lived our values this month. So from day one, you're embedding with your investors and your team, these are our values, and these are the ways we've lived it, and that constant reinforcement. Because I agree 100%. The earlier you start having those discussions about values, the better.
Yeah, and I think as you get to scale, it becomes more important. I mean, I'll just put my Amazon hat on for a second. I mean, like, they're hiring 1 million people. I mean, I think there's 1 million people in the organization now. And the way they do it was just unbelievable. Everything was driven by the leadership principles, which is basically that they're articulated. There's 14 of them. They're articulated company values, and then there was an extremely thorough mechanism that was in place to make sure, you had a bar raiser and then a hiring loop of 4 people. So it was consistent, whether you're hiring the factory floor cleaner or Andy Jesse's assistant. It was just absolutely consistent, and it's not that they didn't make mistakes. I'm sure we did, and I saw it, but the chance of that happening is much lower, and it just makes it much more consistent to get what you want if you have a mechanism driven by the cultural values. All right, look, there's a few questions coming in, and I might not just take them strictly in order, but there's a couple I'm interested in just around visas and overseas talent. Because a lot of founders that we're talking to at the moment, or that we hear from, and I'm sure you're seeing the same, is it's a war for talent, and the fact that there's no inbound talent. You cannot hire overseas anymore, and it's almost worse the other way, because you're getting a bunch of people that were here and loving the life in Australia, realizing that lockdowns suck, and wouldn't it be better to go back home and get back to freedom? So there's kind of this brain drain going out again. Any thoughts on that? Maybe I'll start with Dan. You're probably the most international of us here. Like, what are you seeing around this visas, lobbying, government, etc.?
Look, it's a tricky one, particularly now. I mean, the ability to get into Australia is zero, and so. And
it's about to get worse from what I just read today, with the New South Wales numbers getting slashed again. It'll be less than 1,000 a week coming in. Yeah,
so I mean, it's a really hard one. I mean, obviously the issue of visas and talent pathways into Australia has been one that particularly this industry has been pushing pretty hard for a while, for good reason, I think. Look, we as we sort of talked about, most of our businesses are operating internationally. Most of them have people moving around for various reasons. I think at this point in time, certainly, I think there's a responsibility of our community to be pushing government in the right direction in that area, and hopefully the Tech Council will be a part of that.
Yeah.
But I think the reality is, anyone who's planning, any business for the foreseeable future, and I would suspect we're at least 12 and probably 24 months away from things getting any sort of, things opening up in any sort of dramatic way to large scale, large numbers of internationals coming in. I think one interesting anecdote from just one of the beauties, I guess, of us operating in different markets is there are very different cultural approaches to these things, and different ways of doing things. One of the interesting things we've seen, particularly amongst our Israeli portfolio, and it's been happening there for a long time, is using outsourced dev shops. And these are they are dedicated teams. In some cases, they're actually on payroll. In other cases, they're not on payroll, but essentially treated as employees. And it's always been a little bit contentious, particularly in Australia. There's sort of a view, you got to build everything yourself. You have to own the IT. You got to own all your resources yourself. And where I agree with that sentiment is, if you're saying, hey, we need to make sure that engineering quality is really high. We need to make sure we sort of, we can own that process and we're getting access to good talent. But we've seen that be a really powerful scale benefit for a lot of our portfolio companies, particularly where talent is limited, through Eastern Europe, through Asia, through South America, getting access to at scale. I'm talking about onboarding 20 engineers in a 3-day period, and giving them dedicated things to work on. My guess is that will become more common over here, just out of necessity.
Anyone else got strong views in that? Hannah, you're off mute. I might ask you, like the overseas, what are you thinking?
I mean, I think Dan's spot on. I think there needs to be a legislation shift. But in the meantime, that's another very satisfying answer, right, for the founders on this call who are like, give me the answer for tomorrow. I think simultaneous to what's happening at an industry and government level, I think Dan's suggestions are similar to the ones that we've seen in our portfolio, looking at external teams in places like Eastern Europe, not for core product per se, but for very specific well-defined projects that you feel can be done, and where you're not necessarily building like the very guts of your core IP, which you'd want to sort of keep with a core engineering team that you have complete visibility on. So definitely across Eastern Europe, we've had portfolio companies like Enserata build teams out in Vietnam. Great engineering talent there. Wand has teams in Manila, and they were like exponentially able to increase their capability of delivery, and actually increased sort of this follow the sun approach, where it was sort of like, you wake up in the morning and there's like just so much work that's been done, and then engineers working on core product are actually way more efficient, way more successful. So I think there are a lot of benefits to that, and understanding, go in eyes open, understand that it may not be at the same quality, or navigating those communication challenges of time zones and language barriers and all of those things can sometimes be tricky, but if you find really good partners to work with, that can be extremely valuable. Yeah. And then I would say, as an Australian-based company, if you can really learn to build good processes around distributed working, then the ability to find amazing talent anywhere in the world and not be locked by Australian borders, I think is an opportunity as well. But there needs to be conviction and commitment to establish the foundations of how do we build a remote team, a distributed team, and set those principles in place before you go on a hiring spree and hiring people from all over the world.
Nick, I might ask you a different question. It's kind of the top one that's come in, and in fact, the second top one as well. So like from Mark and Anthony, I know that you are particularly well read, and this may be a chance to plug your mailing list as well, which I'm part of. And I always find something fascinating, and I just don't understand how you get time to read it. So you can maybe touch on that. But any highlights of what you've been reading or listening to about building remarkable culture within distributed teams? And that's kind of linked to in both questions.
Great question. The one that jumps out to me, so this is in answer to Mark's question, what have we been reading and listening to about building remarkable culture in distributed teams? There is a post on First Round Review about thinking about your people org in the way that you think about your product org. So if you Google First Round People Product, it should come up, and I can share it afterwards potentially. So I thought that was a really brilliant article where people in the people org sometimes get put in a bucket of that's sort of unquantifiable or soft, and so did get deprioritized in terms of investment. And thinking with that product mindset is, again, using the word product mindset, I think is a really, really transformative way to think about that organization, so that you can get more resources and get more time. I always think about what bubbles up to the board level discussion. You always have finance in the board level discussion. Increasingly, you see people at that board level discussion, but I think there's still a long way to go where people and finance should be on the same level, but they're just not still in the kind of broader world of business. So that's one. Maybe Mark, if you send me an email, I'll nick up like the .vc. I'll respond with a bunch more links. I just can't think of any that come to mind right now.
Yeah. Anyone else? Dan, have you got anything on your podcast list or book list that you can recommend here?
It's funny. I was thinking of the exact same first round piece that Nick was talking about. As you asked the question, I was like, "I've got a great one," and then Nick came out. I think sharing ideas and finding people you trust is often not done enough amongst founders, and founders just sharing stories with each other. I mean, there's a really interesting story in our portfolio with the Athena guys, the Australian business in the mortgage space. And these were the two founders were senior execs from NAB, and I haven't worked at NAB, but I'm not sure if HR was sort of the top thing that those guys were thinking about as they sort of started to build their new business. And it was just, they're at a dinner with a bunch of other founders, and sort of one of them was talking about how important people and culture was for their organization. Sort of a light bulb went off, and they turned it from, a blind spot to a real area of strength for them, for where now people and culture is is really a sort of cornerstone of the organization. It's helped them now keep some of the best talent, it helps them attract new talent. And so being able to put yourself in an environment with people that you know and trust is fantastic. Shameless plug for our podcast. We have a podcast called Founder Stories, and it talks about it's really focused less around what that business does. Podcast with each of a bunch of founders in our portfolio and outside of our portfolio, but really focused on sort of those founding stories and how they started building their team. So lots of nuggets in there.
Yeah. Hannah, quickly, have you got any recommendations and what we should look at or read?
The one that's sort of coming to mind, this is actually not so much culture focused, but quite tactical, is David Sachs, who's the founder of Yammer, he does a Substack, but he published an article recently that I thought was actually super interesting around the SaaS org chart and how that sort of evolves over time across your sort of seed, Series A, Series B, and it actually comes up at a board level quite often. I circulated this amongst a few of our portfolio companies, and in one particular company, Wand, which is growing very quickly, their engineering team was scaling, but they just had this real imbalance between engineering and product, and just a ton of bottlenecks, and really getting that delicate balance right of product design and eng, and how do you get those ratios correct so that you're still moving as fast as you were when you were a 10-person org, but now you're 100% engineering org. And then what do you do when you're 500 people? And it sounds very sort of specific and ratio driven, but the idea was to provide some very rough rules of thumb around how to get that balance right within your org. And I thought it was actually really interesting. I hadn't seen anyone really sort of do that kind of assessment across a bunch of different companies to see what that actually looks like. So
yeah,
I'll find the link for it and circulate it.
Yeah, awesome.
I can't believe I forgot, but I would definitely add the High Growth Handbook by Elad Gil to my reading list. It's probably my most dog-eared founder focused book. There's sections on hiring particularly, but on all parts of the org, and just in some cases really detailed practical advice. There's just some amazing stuff in there. So I'd have that on my to-do list if I was starting a business and hadn't read that yet.
Yeah. All right, let's try and take some more questions here. So the most popular one, which I like, is from Ken Gerard. Hey, Ken, and I'll read it out. So I'm a founder, 70 years old. What advice can you provide in the light of such entrenched ageism in Australia about replacing aging founders, CEOs with younger talent? And it's kind of linked. There was another question that I saw come in just asking about how to move on talent that's not performing, but this one specifically around that sort of ageism piece. Not that I think 70 is old. I mean, you'd be a young US president, Ken, so you got plenty of time left. Hannah, any thoughts on this one? I mean, have you had any experience with older people in the workforce and how to get the best out of that talent?
Yeah, I mean, I think on our portfolio side, the age ranges vary quite a bit, probably more on the younger end of the spectrum, but certainly the talent, that underpins so much of the work and the value that's being created can vary greatly. And I think it's really about, at the end of the day, it's about the skills and experience and the professional lived experience that someone brings to the table, and not about age. And frankly, some of the learnings I saw, not to draw on Dropbox again, but I think there was a stage where the company skewed quite young, and could have probably introduced more maturity into the business earlier. And by maturity, I mean that maturity of experience, of insight, of the awareness of how to actually build, true enterprise business. And I don't think it happened soon enough. And I think that was a real lesson in that company culture at the time. I'm not suggesting that it had an ageist culture, but certainly there were some unconscious biases around, I want to hire someone who looks like me and is the same age bracket as me. And I think being super aware of those biases is incredibly important, because you will miss a world of talent opportunity to bring in rich minds, rich experiences into the fold of your business.
Yep.
If you approach hiring in that way, if you approach it with an ageist way, in the same way that if you're looking for people who look like you as well, and you lack that sort of gender diversity or ethnic diversity, et cetera. So I don't see it as any different of a bucket.
Yeah. Dan, any experience in this field?
Sorry, just finding the mute button. I think this is one of those areas you'd love to say that those biases don't exist, in the same way we'd love to say that in the same way we'd love there to be more gender diversity, more cultural diversity. I think the industry is doing a lot of work and come a long way to moving those areas forward. Still, if you look at the numbers across any underrepresented group, or on the gender balance, the amount of founders, the amount of dollars getting funded, those numbers are not where we'd like them, to be, and age would be another one of those categories. I think hopefully certainly people on this call and a wider group is shutting their eyes to anything that is completely irrelevant to the discussion: gender, culture, age. I think hopefully we're all just looking for amazing founders with great ideas, and we can look past everything else. And obviously there's a bunch of great tools, less from the sort of founder getting funded side, but certainly on the hiring side, a bunch of great tools around removing diversity from hiring process, removing biases. Removing biases from hiring processes.
That's not the goal.
No, that would be
keep the diversity.
Dan, I gotta thank you, because that's another setup for our portfolio company, Applied. So Applied allows you to remove identifying information from the application and only assess the application on the quality of the answers to the questions you ask. So at least for our hiring processes at Blackbird, we do it blind to any information about the individual, except for the quality of their answers. But while we're on plugs, I thought I'd get one.
I'll just alley-oops, Nick.
Yeah, Dan, you've been lacking in your plugs. I mean, I thought you were going to throw a plug in for Fiverr, given the outsource question, but
different sort of outsource. But if we want to plug them, more than happy to plug them.
All right, look, we are. Yeah, I think we're meant to stop at 5:02, and I've got a couple of things to wrap. So I'd love to ask more questions, but I know that each question will probably gobble up a bit of time, and I do want to get finished by 1 o'clock. Look, please do hang around, panel, but I'd officially like to say a huge thank you. I know you're all busy people, so Dan, Nick, Hannah, fantastic work. Love what you're doing. You're definitely huge supporters of the ecosystem, very founder friendly in your firms and you as individuals. So thank you so much for joining us. I am going to ask you three to click leave and just skedaddle from the stage while I share my screen again. Let me share this, and I'll just do a quick wrap. So please do hang around. As I said at the start, we're on Hopin, and part of the benefit of Hopin is that you can get to just continue the discussion with the panel or anyone else that's still around, or just do some one-on-one networking. Did my camera just die? Anyway, if my camera's just died, hopefully you can still hear me. We are going to jump to that in just a sec. there it is. Oh God, I haven't plugged in my computer. Maybe this is the problem. So let me get through this quickly. We have some pitch events coming up. So Frontier Tech, Impact, and AgTech. So this is for our Horizon Angel Network group. So if you fit any of the bills there, we would love to hear from you, and you get a chance to pitch to some fantastic investors who can help and who have money. So check that out, and please do pitch. Huge thank you. I should have said it at the top, but thank you to our national sponsors: AWS, IAG, Pharmac Ventures, KPMG's High Growth Ventures, and Macquarie. Fantastic support from them, and we really love what they're doing in the ecosystem and how they're helping us. That is it. Thank you again to the panel, and thanks for joining us if you've been here for all three of these. Let's jump over to Hopin and meet some other people, and yeah, we'll see you all again soon. We've got some more events coming up that we'll announce soon. So let's do that.